Field's heyday as a Royal Air Force Bomber Command base, and it's a type that certainly trained large numbers of members of bomber crews who flew from Scampton and other airfields in Lincolnshire. Here it is on the roll, the Avro 19 Series 2 representing the Anson. The beautiful sound of the aircraft's two Armstrong Siddeley Cheetah engines of 420 horsepower each, powering into the air, an aeroplane that was in its day quite revolutionary for the Royal Air Force. It was designed as an offshoot of Avro's Model 652 commercial airliner, and it was intended to meet an Air Ministry specification for a twin-engine coastal reconnaissance land plane, and for its day, although it might not seem so now, it was very advanced, being, as we can see, a monoplane with a retractable undercarriage, because it was the first ever Royal Air Force aircraft to have that configuration. As for the name, well, it was called Anson, after the Admiral of the Fleet, George Anson, the First Lord of the Admiralty, during the 7 Years' War of the mid-18th century. And it was indeed on maritime duties that the aircraft first came into service with RAF Coastal Command in March 1936. RAF Bomber Command, that command most associated with Scampton's history, also took on the Anson as an interim measure, and 26 squadrons in both of those commands had Ansons on strength when war broke out in 1939. Pretty soon the Anson was obsolete on the RAF's front line as hopefully more capable aircraft arrived. The Lockheed Hudson for Coastal Command and the Armstrong Whitworth Whitley for Bomber Command, albeit the Whitley was a somewhat disappointing machine. But nonetheless, the Anson continued its crucial wartime service as a trainer for pretty much all members of bomber crews. It was used for that purpose both here in the UK and in Canada. In the case of training use in Canada, that was as part of the British Commonwealth Air Training Plan. Just under 7,000 examples of the initial Mark I Anson ended up being produced, and there was licensed production in Canada as well. But even after the war, the aircraft carried on being developed, and you see one of the fruits of that here in the form of the post-war civil version, the Avro 19. But the RAF took that on as well. The final Ansons left RAF charge. Those were on the strength of the Western Communications Squadron stationed at RAF Andover. But here we see, as I said, the post-war civil Avro 19. It was an interim measure, this, being intended to fill the gap until the new de Havilland Dove arrived in service. The 19 was given higher roofline, bigger windows, a hydraulically operated undercarriage and flaps, that being a considerable labour-saving device for the crew. The prototype first flew in 1945. This was the first new-built example. It came off the line at Yeaton, which is now Leeds Bradford Airport, in 1946. Later on, it served with numerous civilian operators, including a time in Canada. It's all particularly used use in the aerial survey role with some of those operators. It ended up with the famous Allen collection in Perthshire in Scotland, but then was out of flying use. It was auctioned off in 1981 and bought by the then British Aerospace as a restoration project. Apprentices took it on initially, then a group of retired ex-Avro volunteers at the BAE plant at the old Avro factory airfield at Woodford in Cheshire took over the reins, and eventually that long effort came to fruition in 2001 when Al McDickin took the aeroplane for its maiden flight. It was put back into the colours it wore when it was the Avro 19 Series 2 demonstrator, and today it is based with the Shuttleworth collection at Old Warden in Bedfordshire, while still being owned by BAE Systems and operated by their Heritage Flight. And they've got a considerable presence here in the Heritage Hangar with their other two historic aircraft from their fleet also based at Old Warden in the forms of the de Havilland DH-60 Moth and the Blackburn B2. Quite a considerable commitment, therefore, to aviation heritage on the part of BAE Systems. Of course, Avro, Blackburn and de Havilland, along with so many other manufacturers, are now part of the BAE Systems empire. And it's very nice that they continue to perpetuate the memory and the heritage of all of those great names of British aviation. Now, downwind to land, the Avro 19 in the hands today of a crew headed by Peter Kozagorin. He is one of 4 permanent staff on the strength of the BAE Systems Flight Test Department at Warton in Lancashire. They, between them, cover the Typhoon, the Tornado and the Hawk. And I believe that John Hurrell, who works as a contract test pilot for BAE Warton, is joining Peter in the cockpit today. They always fly this aircraft 2 up. It's one of 2 Ansons continuing to operate on the UK Civil Register. The other one used to be with the Air Atlantique Classic Flights, but is now being operated by its new owner Glenn James from Slape. But here, with a traditional curving approach to land, and I'm sure this is a sight that would have been seen in wartime. I'm sure the station flight at Scampton would have had Ansons on strength at one time or another, either during wartime or post-war. But curving in to land, courtesy of the BAE Systems Heritage Flight, the Avro 19 Series 2.
Very nicely flown too, Ben. Absolute pleasure, and a delightful growl from the engine. So I think it's just such an evocative machine, this.
Yeah, it's very, very nicely flown indeed, and thank you to BAE Systems for their considerable support to this first Scampton Air Show. Touching gently down there, Peter Kozagorin with the Avro 19. He and John Hurrell, indeed, both regular Shuttleworth collection pilots, apart from flying the BAE Systems aircraft that are based there. And so, with that rolling out, we're about to move on and keep the contrasts going in our flying programme today, because we're about to join the rotary wing world.
Just one moment there, Ben, because I've just